Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7 update 1.40 or spec 2. Finally, I'm bringing you my entire guide on all of the events that came alongside this update, and there is plenty of them. We have a bunch of new additions like the WTC 900 or the Nations Cup with the Red Bull X 2019, and we also have plenty of additions to existing championships. It's great to see just so many come alongside this update. I really didn't expect to get this many, and on top of that, they all actually seem worthy of their addition to GT7. Usually we get the typical 2-3 lap sprints, but they kind of replace with very much worthy events, not only focusing around the new track but building upon championships that have existed from day one, as well as obviously bringing in those new additions. They're all decent lengths, they're all kind of making sense to what they're aiming for, and they all feel much better than the usual standard we've received for updates. I honestly didn't expect to get this many events or this kind of quality of events. They're absolutely fantastic. I'll have my final review at the end of the video, so feel free to wait till the end if you want to hear my opinions on it. If not, I'm going to give you a step-by-step guide and basic overview of all of the events that came alongside this update. I'll have them chaptered down below, so we'll start off with some of the shorter events and then get into the kind of menu book ones or the lengthier ones. There's quite a few additions to the new championships as well. I think about 5 or 4 races a piece, so there's plenty to get through. So let's dive straight into it with the Japanese 4-wheel drive challenge. So the Japanese 4-wheel drive challenge has one single new event added on the Lake Louise short track, 38,000 credits for this one, and in terms of your vehicle choice, just use a relatively powerful 4-wheel drive Japanese car and you should be good to do it. In all honesty, all you need to do is just slap some snow tires on and just kind of get yourself acquainted to the snow. Whilst it's fairly similar to the likes of the dirt driving, I'd honestly say the Lake Louise track overall is a much smoother time, apart from usually at the end of a full circuit, but here we're just using the short circuit. So in all honesty, I would head to this event first and kind of use it as a way and means to kind of get yourself used to the snow driving and how the snow driving is going to work. It's quite slippy, it's overall a lot smoother than the dirt, and I actually found myself having a ton of fun. Because we're using typical road going 4-wheel drive cars from Japan, there's plenty to choose to. You just need a car with a fair amount of power. You don't have to go over the top if you don't want to, and in terms of the AI themselves, they're okay, but they're not really too challenging no matter what difficulty you have this one on. To be honest, you should be able to gap them by a decent margin. Like I said, just use this event to get yourself acquainted with the snow and get used to the snow driving. So overall, I completed this event in 4 minutes or just over, with a gap of around about 10 plus seconds to P2 and the rest of the field. In terms of the payout for this one, 38,000 credits without the clean race bonus. You should have no trouble at all getting this one done. So like I said, I definitely use this one as a bit of an introduction event. Apart from that, you can just pretty much use any Japanese 4-wheel drive car and just kind of build yourself up in terms of confidence on the snow. Next up, we have Pickup Truck Race, which gets a single new event, which is also included in the weekly challenges. So this may end up being your first ever weekly challenge race. In terms of the event itself, I just used a absolute stock Ford F-150 Raptor. To be honest, it's really not that difficult. Once again, the AI, although they do seem a little bit faster here, are still relatively inconsistent on these sort of off-road surfaces. Again, if I'd have been using a much more powerful vehicle, then I could probably absolutely breeze this, but I wanted to give myself a bit of a challenge at least. Now, in terms of these, I guess, vehicles and the snow itself, it really does seem quite a suited and worthy event. It's great to see the pickup trucks return and actually feel like this time around they've got some use away from the racetrack and they're getting absolutely thrown about in the snow. Now, like I said, in terms of the AI, if you're going to limit yourself like I did and use a fairly stock truck with little to no upgrades apart from the snow tires, then you're probably going to get a decent challenge here. But again, the AI will probably only be relatively quick on sort of the straight line towards the end overall you shouldn't have much trouble here, and you should be able to absolutely breeze this one once again. Just again kind of getting yourself acquainted to the snow. So we also got a weekly challenge race ticked off there as well. In terms of overall time, it was a little bit longer at 5 minutes 53, so around about 6 minutes, only just gapping the AI. Like I said, compared to those, I just didn't have the straight line speed, but it gave me a nice fair little challenge in the end. 75,000 credits for this one, which really isn't too shabby. So definitely, you know, get a bit of an earning from this one, and again it will just work in your favor for building that bank balance up. So yeah, in terms of this event, it wasn't that difficult at all. I did this in a stock truck just to prove it could be done, but if you're going to be using a fully upgraded one, you're probably going to get it done a lot quicker. Finally, we get the return of the rally cars with the World Rally Challenge, this time for a 4-lap sprint race at the full circuit of Lake Louise. Now, in terms of this event itself, I do apologise for the pause there, it's relatively easy. You can pretty much blag it with a very powerful rally car. Again, you're going to be needing the snow tires for this, but this feels like sort of a decent conclusion to all of the snow racing events. We've kind of gone from getting used to it with a fairly powerful but relatively simple Japanese 4-wheel drive car, to then using a big heavy pickup truck in the snow, to finally using the main categories that should be getting used here, which is the Group B rally cars. Overall, I had a ton of fun with this one. The AI, like I said, just not too difficult. The main bits you need to look out for is the fairly bumpy and technical last few sectors of this track. I'd say whilst it's a rather simple layout at first and quite smooth, it's going to get a little bit more bumpy and a little bit more technical towards the end. But overall, you shouldn't have too much difficulty in terms of beating this one. The only car that I had a bit of a problem with was the Quattro, but I still caught him by lap 2. He just kind of broke away from the pack and just went on his own little travels. So in terms of this event, I shouldn't really need to give you much of a guide. To be honest, it's just overall a relatively simple event, but just making use of those Group B rally cars, which is great to see. In terms of the overall time, around about 7 minutes for this one, with around about a 10-second gap or so. And in terms of your payout, you're going to be taking away 127,500 credits for around about 7 minutes work. Not too bad at all, more if you get the clean race bonus. So again, like I said, this feels like a decent conclusion to the events of Lake Louise. It really felt like we'd gone kind of step by step, and I'd definitely use this as the last one to tackle in terms of these snow driving events. The rally cars are absolutely fantastic, and it's great to see them back. So our first group of events, this time with the Clubman Cup Plus, some of the most tricky little events in the game. And we're going to start off with the Fuji Speedway one. Now I'm actually going to use my 700 pp built Lancer Evolution 3 for this one. I'll have a link to this one down in the description below from its money guide if you do want to go ahead and copy this. I fully recommend getting a car with 4-wheel drive, since we're actually grid starting in this one. You want to be getting a decent launch, and well, because we were using 4-wheel drive in a relatively powerful car with decent grip, we managed to get ourselves up to P2 and begin battling away with this CTR3. Now this is a car that will probably give you the most trouble in a lot of these Clubman Cup Plus events. I believe it also shows up in Monza. It's much quicker than the rest of the grid. It is able to build up a decent gap, and if you're not using a car that's powerful enough, then you're pretty much guaranteed to fall behind this one. As you can see, I was trying everything to get through and past this little CTR, which just seemed to be getting him away constantly, and why I kind of did at first, it was quite quick to just get itself back in front of me. That is a very powerful car to be taking on, and it took me up until lap 4 to be able to make a last minute move, get it down the inside, get my elbows out and just get past it. At that point I did manage to build up a bit of a gap after a little bit of contact there, and to be honest, like I said, in terms of the vehicle itself, I will link it down in the description, but if you're using a relatively powerful 4-wheel drive car, you should have kind of no problem beating this one. It wasn't the hardest of the Clubman Cup Plus events. So there we go, first place for that one. Relatively easy once we manage to, get past that CTR, and that will be the car that gives you the most amount of problems for this event. So let's move into the overall time and the payout for the event. So it took me around about 8.5 minutes to do this one. I got second place by around about 1.5 seconds. Again, mainly battling away and getting stuck behind it for a bunch of laps before making that last minute move and getting my elbows out to get past it. So not too bad in the end. Definitely not the most difficult of the new Clubman Cup Plus events. In terms of payout for this one, 75,000 credits, so fairly average in terms of the time it takes, and the rally ones do actually pay better. But like I said, in terms of the overall difficulty for Clubman Cup Plus, this wasn't the hardest one at all. I believe it was rated quite high as well on the sort of pepper scale, but as long as you can get past that CTR, then you're pretty much golden, and the rest of the grid will probably never bother you at all. So let's move on to event number 2 from the Clubman Cup Plus. So race number 2 is going to take us to Watkins Glen Long Course. We have a 4-lap sprint here for 600 pp vehicles, and you are limited to sports soft compound of tyres. Now, in terms of this event, to be honest, it really wasn't too difficult. Again, whilst I could see it being a bit of an issue if you haven't got a car catered towards it, I just used a relatively tuned Subaru Impreza and managed to absolutely walk away with it in the end. In terms of the AI, it does feel like it's a much bulkier and bigger grid this time, probably due to the rolling start compared to the grid start last time, so we can't really use the four-wheel drive to our advantage and absolutely launch off ahead of them. However, as long as you're sifting through the rest of the field quite nicely, the main cars that are going to give you a bit of an issue are the three up front. I had the Golf here, the Civic Type R, and the 300 SEL. As you can see, it's a nice mix of sort of road and race. There was also sort of a Nissan Super silhouette involved in this race as well, which was quite cool to see. Now, in terms of the overall, vehicle difficulty, they're challenging, but they're not absolutely ridiculous. Like I said, 600 pp, you can relatively make some of the slower cars in the game a fairly decent race car at that sort of pp rating. The only thing really going to be holding you back is sort of the sports soft. They're not as grippy as race tires, so again, I do recommend, if you're not that confident, go down the route of using a four-wheel drive car, and you should be able to get this one fairly easy. Like I said, I didn't do really any tuning, just a few upgrades, and this Subaru Impreza did manage to take the event win. So let's have a look at our overall time. 8 minutes 8 seconds for this one, so relatively in line with the Fuji Speedway race. I managed to get a bigger gap this time around by about 4 seconds, and in terms of the payout, you're going to be receiving 70,000 credits for this one. So overall, a little bit less than the previous event, I believe, and to be honest, it was a little bit easier overall. Definitely one that I'm probably not going to go back to anytime soon, but was a decent little charge through the field and made use of a car that had mainly been sat around in my garage for what felt like the longest time. So overall, not too difficult. I'd recommend just using a fairly decent 600 pp vehicle, and you should be able to gap the rest of the field. Let's move on to event number 3 at Monza. So Monza up next for a 5-lap sprint at 700 pp. Now, in terms of a vehicle for this one, I actually used a GAC Maverick, mainly because Monza is such a fast track. I can mainly make most of my time up in a straight line, so that was why this one was my car of choice. Although I'm going to be losing quite a bit of time in the corners and under braking because I have to brake so early, in terms of the straight line speed, it's going to allow me to absolutely rock it ahead in terms of the straight line. And like I said, Monza is a very fast track, so if you're going to be picking a car, I fully recommend just picking a 700 pp vehicle that you can kind of get customized to a fairly decent straight line speed machine. I'll also have a link for this build down below as one that I used for a money grind what felt like a good few months ago at this point. In terms of overtaking the AI, I managed to take the lead on lap 3, and whilst I did have a few issues at the end in terms of getting myself off track, like you're going to see here on the final lap, I was able to just get the power down and absolutely outrun the rest of the AI. So again, aim for something with a high top speed that can really take, make use of how Monza's laid out, and you should be pretty good to beat this one, no problems at all. Like I said, I'll link the build to this GAC Maverick down below, so you get a relative idea of, the kind of vehicle I went for. So there we go, first place, and apart from that off at the end, a relatively simple event. So I actually forgot to include the payout at the end of the race, but it's 85,000 credits for this one. Pays a little bit more than the other two. In terms of the event length, it's really not too much of a slog of an event. It took me around about, I want to say probably about 10 minutes or so. So hence why you're going to get paid that little bit extra at the end. Again, just build for top speed and you should be good to beat the Monza event. I'll link the build down below in the description. And now on to probably the toughest event of them all, which you probably wouldn't imagine. 35,000 credits for this one at Gr.3, its second ever event. Now in terms of a build for this one, I just went for my engine swap Silvia with the LT5 Corvette engine. All you want to do here in terms of tuning is absolutely take any aero down to the minimum and make sure you've got a nice long gear range. The only real tip I can give you is ensure that your car that you're running is kind of aiming to hit around about 260 plus miles per hour. I found that this was the best way to run it, and as proof here, as you can see, my start went absolutely terribly. I couldn't get traction, I was skidding all over the place, but once I got that power down, to be honest, I managed to just get through the AI and absolutely gap them. For me, this was the toughest of the bunch, and perhaps maybe even one of the toughest of the entire update, mainly because I was sifting through cars. I was, looking at the likes of Bugattis, Lamborghinis, and I just couldn't quite get them to work. So in the end, I just went back to old reliable of straight line speed and engine swap Silvia, which is usually built to be a drift car, but I just decided to turn it into a straight line monster. As you can see, I'm sitting at about 270 miles per hour. You should be aiming for anywhere from sort of 255 to 270 in terms of a average top speed around here, and one that can tackle the big bank turns, and you should be all good. Like I said, remove any aero, just aim for pure top speed, longer gears than usual, make sure it's topping out at something ridiculous, and the AI won't be able to sit in your slipstream. That was the main issue I was having early on, was that the AI in some of the other builds that I was using were just kind of sitting in my slipstream and then able to just pull out of it and just get past me, which was rather quite frustrating. At least here I was managing to build up a good enough gap where the sort of slipstream wouldn't be effective at all and they wouldn't be able to get in it. As you can see, I've got around about a 5-second gap here as we come towards the end of the lap. So overall, not too difficult, just tune for absolute top speed with very little aero grip. Take wings off if you have to, just build for absolute straight line rocket ship speed. In terms of overall time for this event, this is the shortest one of the bunch. 4.5 minutes for this one to complete this event. 52,500 credits with the clean race bonus, 35,000 if you don't get the clean race bonus. There's no reason why you shouldn't get it here, let's be honest. So yeah, this event, again, probably the toughest one of the bunch and the one that's going to give most people the problems. Like I said, just absolutely tune for top speed, take aero off, ensure that your gears are nice and long, and you've got a car capable of sort of sitting between 255 to 270, and you should take a relatively easy win here. Gr.3 Cup next. This one's a little bit different in the fact that all of the cars are actually BOP'd, which is rather quite interesting. And we're going to go into event number 1, which is going to take place at the Red Bull Ring. Now, weirdly enough, this one starts you in first position. However, it does feature varying rain from intermediate conditions to heavy rain. In terms of overall picking a car, I kind of, punished myself here by choosing the McLaren F1 sort of GTR or whatever, which under BOP conditions is rather quite terrible. Now, it's up to you whether you want to run the intermediates or the heavyweights. I'd actually recommend just running the intermediates, since in terms of my event anyway, I didn't spend too much time in the heavy rain, but once it does come, just be aware that it might get a lot more slippy. And in all honesty, at first I was running a rather decent race. I was managing to kind of build a gap up. However, as you can see, around the midpoint to the late point of the race, that gap started going majorly down. The Mercedes AMG behind me just managing to catch me at every twist and turn. So just be aware that the main goal of this race is just to fend off the AI and ensure that you do take first place. Would not recommend using a McLaren F1 here. As you can see, I did manage to get absolutely overtaken on the main straight, getting into a bit of a side-by-side battle here with the Mercedes, and whilst I did get myself ahead, that thing just had much more traction out the corners, and away it went. However, I did manage to get the position back, which is, you know, decent considering I'm doing a bit of a guide here. But yeah, overall, just fend for your life and you should be good to get the first place for this event. It really wasn't too difficult. Again, it's all about just kind of improving those defensive driving skills. So just hold off the AI and you should be absolutely golden. Now, in terms of the overall time of this event, this was a 12 minutes 36.397. So just under 15 minutes, and you're going to be getting paid 125,000 credits for this one. Not too bad for such a short amount of time, to be honest. Now, let's move on to the next one. Now, things are going to get a little bit more difficult after this one. I would say overall this one was relatively easy. I think because it started you so high up the grid, obviously in pole position or first place, that it was just all about being as defensive as possible. And the AI most times are very reluctant. The main place they're going to attempt it is actually on the main straights. So as long as you're doing quite good through the corners and you build up a gap when it's, you know, in the conditions that are going to suit your car, you should be fine. Moving on to event number 2 of the Gr.3 Cup, we're going to have the fastest event of the bunch. This is the Daytona Tri-Oval, and it's all about maximum speed here. So I went for the Ford GT LM race car, the old one, the, you know, Gran Turismo 4 icon, just because it has a relatively high speed. So in terms of the BOP for these cars, just ensure that you're running something with insanely high top speed. I would honestly recommend the Ford GT LM. It's also going to be coming in very, very useful in one of the later events for this as well, mainly at Bathurst or Mount Panorama. In terms of this one, it's such an easy event, to be honest. There's no reason why you can't win this one. As long as you're catering to a top speed vehicle, you can be taking the lead no problem at all. And then all it's about, you know, really after that is just sort of building up that lead, ensuring that the AI can't sit in your slipstream, or else they will catch you at that point. So as long as you break the slip, you should be all good to take a very easy win here. It's not going to take you long at all. As you can see, it's becoming the end of the day here, and we're going to finish up first place nice and easy with a decent gap to the rest of the field. A gap to them by around about 2 seconds. Also another Ford GT LM race car up there, so that just proves how fast this thing is. And yeah, in terms of the payout, it's not too bad actually, considering it's such a short event. As you can see, 56,000 credits without the clean race bonus. I think I tapped a wall at some point, working my way through the grid. So not too bad. With the clean race bonus, you'll get a decent payout for this one. So overall, definitely the easiest event of the 4. Again, both of these first 2 events have been relatively easy. Mainly for this one, just choose a top speed. For the one previous, just ensure that you're being very defensive, and you should be good to get the first 2 events done. Now it's going to get a little bit more tricky from here on in. So let's move over to event number 3 of the Gr.3 Cup, this time at Deep Forest for a 7-lap sprint once again. You're not having to worry about fuel for any of these events apart from one single event at the end, so just run it maximum fuel mode and just go all out attack. Now it's going to start you relatively close to the front of the grid. You're kind of mid-pack, a little bit more forward. Now in terms of this track, I recommend just taking your time and picking off cars as they come. Don't be rushing all the way to the front and making silly little mistakes. AI here were relatively quick, so I chose to use the Lamborghini here, obviously an MR vehicle. And in terms of just mainly getting the overtakes done, most of it was done at the final hairpin. I was managing to run in the slip and then just sort of pull out at the end and just get myself ahead of the car and then try and get a decent drive away. So a lot of my overtaking was done here, and this is where I recommend you to try and pull them all off. Again, just pick your moments mainly. As you can see here, we're on lap 5. I'm going to try and get P2 overtaken. Now these 2 cars up front were the main ones that sort of sprinted away from the rest of the field. They did manage up to build a relatively decent gap, so just keep an eye on the first 2 cars, as they're probably going to be way up the field. And whilst I did manage to overtake the Z4, it did manage to battle back. Again, the AI just a lot more turned up for these events, and they're a lot more challenging, and they're not afraid to be able to attack you given the opportunity. So just be aware that the AI on these races are definitely no slouch, and if you do give them, an inch, they're going to take a mile, and they're going to ensure that they get in front of you. As you can see here, I had a great side-by-side battle this time with the Z4, but I am eventually going to get that move done just a little bit later in a couple of corners time, where I managed to get it down the inside, as you can see, and get that move done and dusted. At that point, it was all about just trying to get myself away from the Z4. Again, the main places I'm going to make up most of my time seem to be actually in that final hairpin where obviously you're going back around on yourself. And again, at the end, I'm going to build up a fairly decent gap by just over a second to bring the Lamborghini home in first place. Definitely more trickier than the others. The AI does seem to be just that bit quicker here and a lot more consistent and not afraid to battle you. So overall, around about 10 minutes for this event, 10.5 minutes if we're being specific. Around about a second gap to the rest of the field. Again, just keep decent pace. If you want to just absolutely blag it, choose one of the absolute meta cars, but the AI is still going to put up a fight. 90,000 credits for this one. So again, not too bad for the payout, but not absolutely amazing either. So like I mentioned, while the first two events were relatively easy, this one was definitely a step in the right direction in terms of making the AI just that bit more competitive. This is by no means the hardest one of the bunch. I actually found Bathurst to be a lot more difficult and the AI to be just as powerful, if not even better than they were here in terms of being consistent and being able to absolutely outrun you if they want to. So that's where we're going to go next. Mount Panorama, Bathurst, whatever you want to call it. No PP limit, but again, it's under BOP. The lengthiest race of the bunch, 10 laps here, so we are going to be thinking about pit stops. However, I do not recommend turning the engine down. The first time I attempted this event, I turned it down and the AI just absolutely gapped me. So in terms of the vehicle, I recommend choosing something with a relatively decent straight line speed. The main reason for this is you've got two very long straight sections where the AI will absolutely gap you if they want to. It's all about just picking your moments, getting as many moves done as you can, but not overshooting it and landing yourself in the barrier. By no means is Bathurst an easy course. You know, when you're up in the mountain, again, you're probably best just following. It's very tight up there and just use a straight line speed car to just pick your moments, run in the slipstream and get as many moves done as possible. So we're around about the halfway point here and I'm running in P4 and I've got a Honda in front of me. After that, there's a fairly chunky gap to the rest of the field, and whilst I did end up running into the back of the Honda, I did manage to move myself up to P3. Now at this point, because the Ford GT-LM that I'm choosing I would recommend for this race isn't too great on fuel, I'm going to have to pit in. However, the leaders also pitted in, so it's all about trying to get as much pace as possible. I recommend not changing your tyres at all. The main reason for this is just because the racing hards will be good to the end. You shouldn't feel too much in terms of the drop off, so we're just mainly doing the pit stop to ensure that we've got fuel covered off. I do recommend just filling the car to full, especially if you're using the Ford. It does seem to absolutely drink fuel. I tried a Honda first, and again, whilst that was better on fuel, I ended up turning the engine down, so I just lost far too much time, and I definitely needed something that was a rocket in a straight line. So we come out of the pits, we're still behind the Genesis, and we're just going to try and push as hard as we possibly can to the end. We haven't bothered changing tyres, we've just gone purely for fuel, and now the chase begins. The rest of the pack pits in, so up front we've got the two cars that were ahead of us anyway. We've got the GTR coming out the pits, who pitted a lap later at the end of lap 6, and the Genesis. So the Genesis does come out ahead of the GTR, and now it's time to put pedal to the metal and absolutely thrash this vehicle. Eventually we do catch the GTR. It did seem to sort of drop off a bit in terms of being on the top of the mountain, and we did manage to get that move done, if not a little bit scruffy. Now this is where the Genesis seemed to drop a bit of pace. Mainly when it was up in the mountain, it was losing time, but it still managed to get a bit of decent top speed. However, we were just much quicker. So whilst we're going to ride on the bumper of the Genesis here, we're then going to try and dive down the inside and then gap it as quick as possible to kind of break any chance of a slipstream. Again, the AI just being much more difficult here than they really have in any race before. They're much more consistent, much faster in a straight line, but we did manage to get this one pulled off, gapping in the end by around about 2.5 seconds at the end of 10 laps. Absolutely great race. Great to see a more lengthy event take place at Bathurst as well. 22 minutes 2 seconds for this one, so around about a 20-minute plus for this event. Fastest lap of 2 minutes 7.455 on lap 8, gapping the AI by around about 2.5 seconds. This is the best paying of the bunch. 200,000 credits without the clean race bonus. If you get the 50%, you're going to be getting 300,000 credits for this one. Not too bad. A great race overall. Fantastic to see pit stop strategies and stuff play into it, and all about timing and making your moves and just trying to be as quick as possible for 10 laps straight. Absolutely fantastic event. One of my favourites of the entire update. So there we go. That is the Gr.3 Cup done and dusted. Definitely recommend a straight line speed car on Bathurst, because that is where the AI is going to absolutely try and outrun you through those kind of big long straights at both the start of the lap and the finish. So let's move on to the next group of events. Okay, so quick little break in the guide here before we dive into the WTC 900 and the Nations Cup. The way I'm actually going to structure this is because there's extra events that aren't covered in the menu books. For both of these, I'm going to cover them first with fresh commentary. But because I've already done complete menu book guides on the rest of the events that are included, I'm also going to mix that video in here as well. So if I sound a bit different and all that, yeah, that's probably why. But the reason I'm doing that is just, look, I've already done the strategies for them. There's no point in me re-commentating on them. But overall, they are still completely relevant to the overall events. So they're going to be mixed in with obviously the new events first, then the menu book ones, and then, you know, we'll go category by category as we have been. So yeah, just a heads up there. Let's get straight into it. We'll start off with a WTC 900, which has 4 overall events. Okay, so all of these events are going to be shown. Like I said, some are going to be included in the menu book video that I'm going to show next. But first up, I'm going to show you Trial Mountain, which actually doesn't fall under that menu book. This one pays 160,000 credits before your clean race bonus. Now, in terms of the strategy that I recommend, it's completely up to you. It's very lenient in terms of the 900 PP limit, considering most of the cars you're racing against are either Group 3 or Group 2. I went for a fuel-saving hard tyre run. This way, I'm not having to stop at all. So I used the Peugeot 908. I went into fuel mix 6 and basically just cruised my way through the pack. In terms of the Group 2s, they do have decent pace, but most of them are on completely alternate strategies. As you can see, some cars will be on sort of a medium, maybe a soft, and they'll sort of pit in around the midpoint, whereas others will wait as long as lap 8 or 9 to begin to sort of pit in. Now, one car that you do need to watch for, at least in terms of my instance, was actually first place. That car managed to build up a massive gap over the rest of the field. However, that was one of the cars that was on a sort of, you know, medium sprint strategy, meaning it did have to pit eventually, and that's when I managed to take advantage of that and sort of jump the vehicle itself. Now, in terms of the vehicle that you want to use, like I said, 900 PP limit, very, very lenient. You can probably get away with using some ridiculously fast build, but then it kind of takes away from the fun of it. At least here I've got a bit of a challenge. I'm just trying to, you know, no stop it, and although I'm losing pace, I'm at least kind of getting a bit of a challenge working my way through the field. So like I said, first place, although it did build a massive gap up to second place, eventually it did have to pit in at the end of lap 7, and that's where I managed to jump it and take a relatively easy win here at Trial Mountain. Again, if you want to, you can pretty much pick almost anything. A 900 PP limit is absolutely massive, and like I said, most of the cars here, in fact all of them, were sort of a Group 2, Group 3 mix. So in terms of this event, it took just over 15 minutes at 17 minutes and a half. And in terms of the payout, it was 160,000 credits without the clean race bonus. So let's move into the 3 that are covered in the menu book for the WTC 900. Now, to begin with, you're going to see that I'm actually going to put the fuel mix at 6. This is just because I'm getting a general gist of sort of where the fuel consumption's at with this vehicle. But overall, I recommend just keeping it at fuel mix 1 and just working your way nicely through the pack. If you want the clean race bonus, try and avoid any contact. I'm not going to end up with a clean race bonus here, but you'll get the 50% bonus on top of the original payout for obviously completing this event. So the main thing you're doing here is basically just working your way through the pack as quick as possible. As you can see, I finally did end up turning the engine back up. Now, as you can see from the fuel consumption, we're getting around about 8 laps here. We're around about, you know, a lap and a half in. Now, I do recommend that at some point to turn the engine down, but I'll tell you exactly when. Just to begin with, make sure you're as fast as possible, just working your way through the pack, and then starting to begin the fuel saving and tyre saving process, as the racing mediums we do have on are going to begin falling off probably around about the sort of, you know, 3/4 point. That's where you need to start worrying about sort of conserving the tyres. So on to lap 3 here, we're catching up with a few more vehicles. We're going to try it down the inside there, getting a little bit of a kick out, obviously losing downforce at the lower speeds here in the Porsche, which is just never a good thing. It's going to cause the rear to obviously kick out. So we're going to battle away with this Nissan, hopefully work our way through as quick as possible. And as you can see here, we've got the first of a couple of groups of vehicles. Now I found this through most of the events that certain types of vehicles will sort of group up around certain points of the track. You know, they'll just follow each other, or they'll just kind of get stuck behind each other. There's usually kind of two separate groups that will end up doing this during the event, with the rest of the cars being, you know, a little bit more spread out. So you're going to take a decent chunk away there, and we're up to P9 on lap 3. Now moving on to lap 4, we're just behind the Honda NSX here, and we've also turned the engine down. This is where I recommend you start taking it a little bit more easy. Think about conserving those mediums. Again, we've got decent pace, they've got decent life, and they will last the entire race, but you want to start kind of, you know, toning the engine down, reducing any wheel spin, any slip, things like that. On to lap 5 again, we've caught the second pack. This is sort of what I like to call the front pack, where the leader will probably be a little bit ahead of them, but then you've got a general pack. Now, as you can see, in terms of our overall top speed, we're nowhere near as quick once the hybrid system has, you know, kind of gave us that initial boost than the Group 2s. So we are at a disadvantage in terms of the straight line speed. Just sit in the slipstream and just start planning ahead for your overtaking to be done. As you can see here, we're going to try it down the inside of the GTR, but then the GTR moves over. Was going to attempt to move on the Lexus there by the look of it. So we do get a little bit cut off. We're going to back out of it and just kind of, you know, get ourselves ready and put it around the outside there. Now we should have enough drive off. As you can see, we're going to have the hybrid to give us a nice little boost, and around the outside of the GTR we go before chasing down this Lexus, getting it up the inside and getting that move done. Sat in P2 here now on lap 6. A lot of the other cars will be pitting at a later stage. So we're going to go around the outside of the McLaren, which is currently in the lead, and now we can start thinking about full fuel and tyre conservation. So here we go, turning the engine mode down to 6. I do recommend doing it at this point. Kind of make sure you're taking the lead anywhere from sort of lap 6 to lap 8 at most, and then start thinking about turning that engine down. Conserve your fuel, and you should have plenty of fuel to get you to the end. As you can see, the rest of the AI, they're kind of oddballs when they pit. Some of them will sort of pit really kind of midpoint. Some will pit literally going on to their final lap like you're seeing here. But overall, you should have a decent advantage coming to the end of the race there. So that is race 1, or topless, done and dusted. Rather quite easy, completely up to you if you want to run the mediums or hards. Overall, we did a time of 16 minutes 8 seconds, 0.459. Our fastest lap was on lap 5 of a 1:36.054, with around about a 30 to 35 second gap to P2. Now we're going to take away 150,000 credits for that win there. Again, not too much in terms of the payout, and we didn't get the clean race bonus for that added 50%, but it does give us a nice little stamp on our menu book, and then we're going to move on to the Nürburgring next. So overall, event number 1, really not too difficult. Again, in terms of your strategy, you can go on the racing hards, but you're not going to have really too much pace on those. You'll still probably be able to easily beat the event, but again, that overall pace isn't going to be there that you're going to get on the mediums. You can do it on the mediums, but just be kind of aware from about lap 8, lap 9. That's where they're really going to start dropping off, and you need to be a lot more careful. That's why I recommend, once you've taken the lead, just to, you know, start conserving those tires and start saving that fuel. So we're going to do a complete opposite strategy of what we did at Autopolis. We're actually going to go into full lean mode to begin with, and just run it this way for around about 6 laps. This gave me, you know, enough fuel at the end to just kind of cruise across with around about half a lap of fuel or so, and the tires still in relatively good condition. So we're going to go for full tire conservation and full fuel in terms of, you know, preserving that and making sure we can get ourselves all the way to the end without a zero, you know, without stopping. Now in terms of working your way through the AI, they're going to be much tougher to beat. Obviously we don't have the straight line speed, the engine's completely turned down, so, you know, even with the hybrid, we're just not going to be as quick as we would running it at its maximum potential. So again, just take your time, make your overtakes as clean as possible, unlike me there, who ended up clattering into the side of the CLK-LM. But yeah, definitely just take your time, work your way through the pack as much as possible, and then when you get onto lap 4, I recommend just turning the engine up, and this should give you enough fuel to get all the way to the end. As you can see, I got onto lap 4, I'm sitting around about P12, I'm going to turn the engine up, and this is going to give us a ton more power a ton more one lap potential, and we're just going to begin to work our way through the grid. Now in terms of the AI strategy, this is where it's definitely a lot more differing from the one at Autopolis. Although you'll kind of run into the groups of cars, and some will pit at the midpoint, some will pit at the end. I believe also that some of the cars just won't pit at all, and in fact the car that you're seeing at the top of the table there on the left hand side actually didn't bother pitting at all, meaning that if we had have taken a pit stop in here, we'd have lost a ton of time and probably cost us an overall victory. So I do recommend actually running the sort of racing hard zero stop strategy, at least for the Nürburgring. It's going to change it once again when we head to Suzuka, and it's obviously a different strategy from Autopolis, but this was definitely the best way to run it, just to ensure that we don't have to take a pit stop and ensure that we've got enough tyre life all the way to the end, and we should be absolutely golden for a win. So there we go, that's the move for first place. Now we're not going to, majorly gap that vehicle. It's going to manage to stay within around about 10 seconds or so for the majority of this race. As you can see, we're rounding the final few corners now. We've got around about half a lap of fuel left, so again we've saved just enough before turning it up on lap 1, and as you can see the car behind us just never bothered pitting, meaning that he did manage to stay with us for the majority of the race. We just couldn't outright blast away like we could at Autopolis. So that's race 2 of 3 done and dusted. I fully recommend a zero stop strategy for that one. In terms of our overall time, it was a bit longer at a 17 minutes 57.245, with the fastest lap coming on lap 10 and the final lap with a 1:45.792. Only just beating the non-stopping GTR there, who also had a pretty decent gap to P3. So just watch out for that car if you're going to be playing through this event. In terms of the payout, again, we took 135,000 credits from this one. No cleans, did get a bit of contact there with the CLK early on in the event. Decent payout, really, nothing amazing, but average. So the first thing I'm going to do is just charge on as quickly as possible through the pack. Now in terms of just getting through them, I just fully recommend just do it as cleanly as possible. Try and just get used to the track, especially if you're not too confident in the likes of a Group 1 or Group 2. It's a very technical but very, very rewarding track. Obviously Suzuka, it's just an absolute blast to play through. Now I'm going to just fast forward a little bit, go on to lap 4. As you can see, the mediums are starting to wear. I noticed that tyre life here was definitely not as good as the likes of Autopolis and such. We're definitely beginning to feel a bit of wear quite early on. So we're going to work our way through the pack and again begin to try and charge down that first place. So we're around about 10 seconds behind him at this point, but what we're aiming to do is just get on the back of him as soon as possible. We did that a lap later, onto lap 5, and as you can see, once we're past him, we just want to gap him as much as possible. This point, we're going to think about doing a pit stop, but I'm not going to do it just yet. I'm going to hang the car out for one more lap and then pit at the end of lap 6. We've built up a decent gap, as you can see, around about 7 seconds as we come through here, and now we're going to dive into the pits, put the car on full racing soft, so we're at our maximum performance potential, and fuel it a little bit just to ensure that we've got enough fuel to the end. Like I said, we're not fuel saving here, we're not saving tyres, we are just going absolutely flat out. And by lap 6 anyway, or come the end of it, those racing mediums were pretty much starting to wear and really starting to get a bit more slippy. So we're going to go on to the racing softs now, just to finish up and be at our maximum potential. So as you can see, when we're going to come out of the pits, we've dropped down to P4, around about a 15-second gap from P1, but I'm pretty confident that on these softs we can manage to get that gap down as soon as possible. At the end of lap 7 we did manage to get it down, but then the 2 cars ahead of me decided to pit anyway. So now we're pretty much home and dry. We just need to ensure that we keep the racing softs in as best condition as possible and just go as flat out as possible. Down these big long straights we have a massive disadvantage, but we are going to try and make use of that by making it up in the corners. And coming towards the end of the event with the racing softs starting to drop off, we did end up having a bit of a slip, but we had a decent margin of around about 30 seconds or so to P2. So there we go, that is it. That is the final event done and dusted for the World Touring Car 900. So as you can see, we did an overall time a little bit longer this time at 18 minutes 12 seconds .898. We did a fastest lap on lap 9, of a 1 minute 45.269 with a gap of around about 30 seconds plus to P2. AI really not putting up much of a fight for this one. Easy enough to get away with a nice little pit stop strategy here. 170,000 credits, once again not getting the clean race bonus. Bit of contact through the kind of midpoint of the race and slipping off there at the end. Definitely blew our chances of that. Definitely the highest paying of the bunch. Pays a lot more compared to the Nürburgring, and that is going to give us our final stamp for the World Touring Car 900. Okay, so the Nations Cup, this one was definitely a tough one. By the end of doing all 5 of these events, I just absolutely felt exhausted. So we're going to go to Trial Mountain once again, picking off the 2 events that aren't covered in the menu book before we go into obviously the menu book events. So Trial Mountain, this one here is probably one of the easy ones of the bunch. Only really made a little bit more difficult than the likes of Interlagos, which is kind of sort of an introduction to the rest of the Nations Cup in my opinion. So in terms of this event here, I went for the racing hards and a 0-stop strategy. So we're not having to worry about fuel life here, or consumption or whatever. The main thing we are worried about really is the tire life, and that's why I recommend the hards. Whilst it probably is doable with the mediums, you'd definitely be cutting it close towards the end of the event. So I recommend the hards and just pick your way through the pack lap by lap once again. Just kind of time your moves. You don't want to be stuck up behind the AI too much, but you don't want to be making anything too risky and end up losing a ton of time that way either. Now a lot of the AI will be pitting kind of on and off during this event, so it is a bit of a mixed bag really, and it is kind of a bit easier in that sense. In terms of first place, they had a massive gap, but once again they just dived into the pits, meaning that come the end of it I had a decent gap over anyone else behind me, and I just managed to sort of save the tires and get myself all the way to the end with enough fuel left in, not having to fuel save or anything like that. So that's going to be Trial Mountain done. A relatively easy event. However, the next event is the complete opposite of this one. So this one, not too bad, decent payout as well. And in terms of the overall strategy, I just recommend just absolutely pushing to the limits on a set of hards, and then you don't have to bother with pitting or anything like that. Again, I don't recommend the mediums because they'll probably drop off too much at the end. Overall time for this event was 22 minutes 8 seconds. Fastest lap wasn't actually set by me. I believe it was set by the AI there at kind of the midpoint. A lot of them do kind of run on the softs. Payout 200,000 credits, so really not too shabby. Again, like I said, in terms of this event, it isn't too difficult at all. You should be able to do it on a 0-stop strategy, and that's actually how I recommend you going about doing this one as well. Now we're going to move on to the next event, which is the complete opposite of this one. We're going to move on to the Lake Maggiore one, which is going to be an absolute tricky event, probably the hardest event of this entire update. I tried it on hard at first and actually had to turn the difficulty down. So like I mentioned, for me this was the hardest one of the bunch. This is a 14 lap race around Lake Maggiore. As you can see, I tried it on hard and could only get second, mainly because first place just absolutely disappears by a ridiculous margin. Now it's not too bad on sort of medium, which is the event difficulty that you see in here, but on hard, like I said, it was around about something ridiculous. I think almost 15 to 20 seconds. It just managed to break free of the rest of the pack early on and then just disappear into the distance. Now once again here, I do recommend the hard strategy as well as running just sort of like a no-stop strategy. The main reason I do recommend this is because, again, most of the AI won't pit, and in fact first place in this one just doesn't pit, and I'm not sure if they're supposed to, but it does seem that they've just got ridiculous pace compared to everything else, and that the fact that they should realistically be running maybe something like softs or mediums, and that they should be boxing in at some point, but that just doesn't seem to be the case. So even though I got myself into P2 on medium, there was still a decent enough gap, whereas on hard difficulty the first place was around about 15 seconds up the road. It was just absolutely ridiculous. Do not recommend doing this one on hard. Recommend keeping it on medium. And as you can see, tie wear here, it's not too strenuous, but the hards here really don't have too much pace in terms of overall grip. Again, you'll probably take a relatively easy win on medium difficulty, but on hard, like I said, just expect the AI in first place to absolutely be gone, and they won't be pitting, unlike some of the other cars that are taking place. Now, as you can see, 22 minutes, almost 23 minutes for this event. The fastest lap actually went to the AI of a 1:35. Again, just seeming to have decent pace on every difficulty. Payout for this one, 200,000 credits, so definitely not too bad at all for a relatively straightforward, no stopping 20-minute event. So again, treat it like an extreme sprint race and you should be all good. So with that done, let's move straight in to the menu book event. So race 1, this feels a bit like an introduction to the other two events. You're going to be starting at the back. There's only 12 other vehicles on the track, and like I said, as you get into the other two events, they're going to be much bigger in terms of their scale, and a little bit different in terms of you starting mid-pack and either trying not to lose places but also trying to get yourself going forward as well. Now we're on the highest difficulty here and we don't have a car advantage. Now in terms of the way you want to run these, I fully recommend running them like an extreme sprint. What I mean by that is you don't need to fuel save, go on the fastest possible tyre and get ready for them to fade off massively towards the end of the event. For Interlagos, I fully recommend the racing softs. The main reason for this is, in all honesty, they held in quite well. Even when they got to the end of the event and, they should realistically be making the car skid and slide everywhere, it just didn't do that. As long as I was short shifting and using my manual transmission, I was just absolutely fine to just coast around for a couple of laps with fairly worn out tyres. So since you're not actually worrying about saving your fuel or anything like that, the main thing you want to do is just keep an eye on that tyre life and just overtake the AI as fast as humanly possible. The main reason I recommend doing this is just because you've got a bit of clear track, you can focus on keeping them softs alive as much as possible all the way to the end. Now slipstream is going to be one of your best friends when it comes to these cars. They're absolutely great at following in terms of absolutely slingshotting yourself past. It works an absolute charm. Even on the highest difficulty, you can really pull off some last minute slingshot moves to get yourself into the corner before the AI. As you're going to see, I'm going to do it exactly now on the leader. I'm going to pull out, get it down the inside, and that's going to be first place over and done with. At this point, I can just focus on ensuring that my tyres are going to get to the end, and that's exactly what I did. Although they were very much worn at that rear right, to be honest, it was rather quite easy to keep the car going for this length of time. In terms of the overall event, it was a 15 minutes 30.728. Fastest lap came on lap 5 of a 1:16, and in terms of the event payout, it's 150,000 credits without clean race bonus. This is so I can take advantage through the sort of middle to late sector where it gets quite twisty and turny, and use the slipstream to kind of carry me along down the main straight. There really is no downside to just boosting up that downforce, apart from really having more grip. So in terms of the event, use it exactly the same way that you did the one previous. We're going to be starting on the softs here. However, I would recommend that you actually take the mediums. The main reason for this is I spent a lot of the latter half of this event absolutely struggling for grip, losing time. Although I managed to pull a decent enough gap out, that was pretty much gone later on. So I actually took the lead initially on lap 3, which is quite early on, and overall it felt much easier, and I began to build a gap. However, you're going to see a little bit later on, come lap 11, my tyres were absolutely shredded, and I've still got a good chunk of time to, absolutely drag this car across. And my gap to the car behind, in fact 2 of them, was completely depleting. By the time I got to lap 13, I was pretty much ready and willing to be a sitting duck and be absolutely overtaken at the last minute. However, I did manage to kind of keep the car going. This is why I fully recommend taking mediums and just kind of playing the long game. I tried to sprint it and it didn't really work too much. Only just holding in there by the time lap 13 ended, winning by around about 0.2 of a second. But in the process, going away with one of my most entertaining races against GT7's AI ever. In terms of my overall time for this one, it was a bit longer at 18 minutes 29.734. As you can see, the grid overall was much bigger and we started mid-grid. Fastest lap was a 1:23.442. on lap 2, and in terms of the sort of, you know, top 13, it was all separated by less than 10 seconds. This was an insanely good race, insanely exhausting, but insanely close. Really enjoyed this one, but I do recommend going for the mediums. In terms of your payout, a little bit more for this one, 175,000 credits. Again, didn't get the clean race bonus, but if you do, you'll get a 50% on top of that, and that's going to give us stamp number 2. So on to the final event of this menu book. This is Dragon Trail Seaside, featuring the notorious Death Chicane. Yeah, it's not too bad actually. You can actually use it to your advantage. The AI through there seem to be massively inconsistent and just very, very outright slow. I recommend the default tuning setup. There's no real need to change much of anything. And in terms of the tyre compound, I recommend taking the mediums, which should just about give you enough grip to get all the way to the end. I don't recommend running hards, it's just outright too slow. As you can see through the Death Chicane, the AI here are incredibly inconsistent. You're not needing to fuel save or anything like that, so just be, you know, take your time, but be quick through there, and you can make up a ton of time on the AI. As you can see, I'm going to take the lead here on lap 7 out of 14, around about the midway point, and realistically I'm never going to look back. Because of how slow the AI is actually through the Death Chicane, I managed to build up a pretty nice gap before the tyres started falling off, to be honest. As you can see from around about lap 13 or 14, I was just gently taking my time and just trying to conserve the rest of them to get myself across the finish line, which I did, ahead by around about 7/10 to a second in terms of the rest of the AI. Just build at your advantage early on and you should be all good at the end when the tyres start dropping off. As you can see, 19 minutes 6 seconds, 0.231 for this one, and the AI actually got the fastest lap on lap number 10, which is the final lap, with a 1:18.949. So now it's time to move on to the payout for this event. In terms of the overall payout, this is the highest paying of the three, 190,000 credits. Didn't get the clean race bonus, but you will get the 50% on top of that, obviously. And that is going to give us our final stamp for our menu book, meaning that we've completed both of the new menu books for, I guess, update 1.40, spec 2, whatever you want to call it. So there we go, that is my full event guide for update 1.40 or GT7 spec 2. Overall, I'm going to give you my opinion on what I think of all of these events combined and if they're worthy of their addition to GT7. And well, like I said at the start of the video, I honestly think this is the best batch of events yet. However, to be honest, with how quick race and, you know, all of that stuff and custom races have now been changed to actually match a very much more balanced economy, we really don't need as many events as these, and I don't think we'll ever see this many added again in a single bunch to GT7. However, for what we got here, I massively enjoyed these events. They're all worthy additions. They cater for everything from, you know, rally to Nations Cup, BOP'd races. You know, you've got grid starts, you've got ones where you're defending in the wet. You know, overall, this is the best batch of events in terms of their quality that we've ever had in GT7. Each of them feel fantastic, and overall, I absolutely loved my time with them. I did over 500 miles just completing all of these events and just enjoying every single second of it. But like I said, with quick race and custom races now being kind of more balanced in terms of the economy, we don't necessarily need this many every single update, and I won't be disappointed if we don't see this many, you know, per update ever again. To be honest, it was worth the wait. They're all amazing events and they're all great in their own right, catering from literally everything really. You know, you've got race cars, road cars, snow, just cannot complain. Fantastic, and props to Polyphony for actually not only making these events, you know, overall fantastic and being a bunch of them, but actually making them feel like quality additions, each and every single one of them, even down to those shorter snow races and such. So that's going to be it from me. Hopefully you enjoyed this 1.40 event guide. Hopefully I've covered everything in the best way I can, and whilst a lot of them are relatively straightforward, there is a few, you know, tricky events kind of mixed in here that will probably test the patience of quite a few of us. Right, I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. This video feels like it took an absolute eternity to make, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.